We're talking about the power of educators and origin stories. John, I'll start with you because this is deeply personal. I was telling you earlier, you read the first couple of chapters, it was powerful. I teared up. You go deep into your childhood. So let's talk about how you decided to start there, and then I'll come to you, Karita.
Thank you. This is an amazing event. I'm so happy to be here with Karita and to be a part of this. So, I wanted to write a book that was really a love letter to teachers, to say thank you to the teachers who've made such a difference in my life and the amazing teachers I've gotten to work with over my career. And the best place to start that story was with Mr. Osterwald, my teacher in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. He looped with us. He was my teacher when my mom passed away in October of my 4th grade year when I was 8. And he was my teacher through the years when I lived alone with my dad. My dad was struggling with Alzheimer's, and home was incredibly difficult. I didn't know what my father would be like from one night to the next. Some nights he'd talk to me, some nights he wouldn't say a word. Some nights he'd be angry, other nights sad, sometimes violent. And the thing that sustained me was Mr. Osterwald's classroom at PS 276 in Canarsie. And truly, if not for him, I wouldn't be on my stage today. I don't know that I'd be alive today. And I remember the things in his classroom like it was yesterday, from reading the New York Times every day to doing productions of Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream, doing a production of Alice in Wonderland where I was the rose with big red felt petals sticking out of my head. And I remember those things so clearly because his classroom was the one place I could be a kid when I couldn't be a kid at home. And I wanted to tell, not so much my story, but his story, the story of teachers who are saving lives.
Which is a very different story that we're hearing nationally. I'm going to touch on that later, but Rita, this is a tour through history, but you also have personal aspects in here. Tell us how you decided to launch Battle of the Black Mind into that story.
Hey, y'all. I inherited this story. I inherited it from my parents, Richard and Arnita Brown, who attended the segregated schools in Lynch, Kentucky. I inherited it from my grandparents, who were not afforded access to a public education beyond the 3rd grade. I inherited this from the at least 10 generations of my family who have been in these United States, for the most part, enslaved, without access to education, where they were not afforded the right to read or write. So I really thought a lot about how in one generation, after my parents went through that era of desegregation, am I sitting in a classroom being a full professor at an elite college, Emory University, that they wouldn't even have been able to apply to when they were children. I think about how education was the great equalizer, as you often say, Nicole. It certainly has been for me. So I really wanted to unpack the long battle, the history of what Black education has meant in this country as a system of power, exclusion, attempted oppression, but also one of great empowerment. I was searching for the stories of how African Americans situated education as a part of the long Black freedom struggle, built their own schools and curricula, and thrived and survived through systems that were meant to exclude them and keep them out. So that's what I was up to in Battle for the Black Mind.
In both of those ways, you all are challenging narratives. John, I think a lot about this whole challenge of who will succeed and what it takes to succeed and where you come from and how that shapes you and who we can salvage. That's maybe one narrative. And Karita, you challenge the narrative around philanthropy and the role that it plays in bettering our society. So let me kick back to John with that first thing. By all accounts, you should not have made it.
Yeah, And look, one of the things I talk about in the introduction to the book is I have this experience where when people hear my story, they want to make it a Horatio Alger story, right? They want to use it to say, see, all the systems are fine because you had all this trauma, all these struggles, and you made it. So it must be that you're special, systems are fine, and why can't everybody else do that? I literally had a conservative talk show host say that. He's like, well, you did it. Why can't all these other people?
You're Oprah.
Right. And
Why can't the rest of you have?
Right. And I said to him, you're missing the whole point of the story.
Yeah.
The point of the story isn't about me. It's about, I was lucky that there were teachers, educators who intervened in my life at the right moment. And there are plenty of folks, I do a lot of work on prison education. There are plenty of folks who are incarcerated, who are smarter than I am, who are more talented than I am, but they didn't have that person to intervene at the right moment. And so, to my mind, part of why I share my story in the role of teachers is to challenge the systems and say, we need to make sure it's not a matter of luck. We need to make sure that every young person has access to a quality educational experience that sets them up for success. So we have to change our systems if we want to get to a more just society.
And Karita, you'd say philanthropy is not always the thing that changes us to get us closer to that. When we look at the history of philanthropy and education, what did you pull away from that?
So there's this saying that my aunties would always say, all money ain't good money. And that was basically the lesson that I learned through 8 years of deep archival research into the history of the Black education system. When I started this research, I thought that I would spend most of my time in the South, most of my time digging into the archives of individual institutions throughout the South. No, it led me to the corporate offices of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Anson Phelps Stokes Foundation, and many, many other big philanthropies that were born out of attempts to control the American education system. What I found was there was a particular focus on Black education in the South. Why? Because if you think about early philanthropy, it's a proxy for the robber barons of the Gilded Age, right? These were industrialists who had mills that needed milling, railroads that needed building, factories that needed meat packing, and they were looking for not only labor, they were looking for cheap labor and docile labor. So what better way to inculcate the next generation of laborers who wouldn't strike, who wouldn't fight for their rights, if you inculcate those, that sensibility through the curricula, through the school system. So we have here a dual story of striving of Black educators and parents and communities, and also a system that's being built up to bake the cake before we even get a chance to get on even and level playing field with access to education.
How powerful is it to talk about the good in our educators?
And I think we have to lift up public education and defend public education from being defunded, right? We have to make sure that people understand how central public schools are to the long-term health, not only of our economy, but our democracy. And we have to ask, and I think Karita does a really powerful job of this in her book, we have to ask, what's the agenda of the folks who are attacking public schools in this way? Like, what's the long-term goal? Why do we want to eliminate teaching about the history of slavery or the civil rights movement? What's the long-term plan? And what I fear is the long-term plan is if you erase that history, you make our whole democracy more vulnerable to those who want to establish supremacy in the society and bring us back, not to 1960, but bring us back to 1860. Right? And so to me, that's where we have to be vigilant that these things that may seem small, 10 years ago when folks started these book bans and talking of the attacks on critical race theory, people were too quiet, they were too calm, they were too like, oh, it's only in Florida.
Yeah.
It'll
Texas.
be fine.
Yeah.
It's not going to grow. And now it's this movement that is sweeping across the country. And even when they don't change the law, people are still scared. There's these stories of superintendents going in the night to the library to take books off the shelves because they're scared. If this kind of organizing that you were describing takes place, they could lose their job. So the chilling effect is terrifying.
John, we've seen this before. After the fall of Reconstruction, and what was the rallying cry? States' rights. What's the rallying cry today? So when you hear that, I always want you to ask states' rights to do what and to whom. Because last time I checked, that got us real quick to Jim Crow. That licensed and permissioned states to differentially decide how they were going to treat their citizens and the least among them, right? So when you read chapter 11 of Project 2025, if we're to take that document seriously at all, what is the end game for their plan for education today? It's to completely privatize the American education system. So this concept of public education as a right for every child in America, right? As a matter of, a standard of living in this country, that's what's on the chopping block right now. And it's a long, incremental, slow drip, long road to get there, so it doesn't feel so, maybe it doesn't feel so drastic. But little by little, that's where it gets us. And when we're talking about a move to mass privatization like that, I want you to think about how did that work out for our healthcare. When you talk about privatizing a public good, you create automatically, you're going to have a system of haves and have-nots. When I was growing up, I didn't buy water. Did y'all buy water growing up? Okay, so I want you to think about what privatization of public goods looks like. It comes to a point where you can only access that thing if you can pay for it. And, scale water to education, healthcare, our retirement plans. That's the move along many axes of our society today, and we have to stay vigilant.
What's the best way for us, because we're talking resistance, and we've just talked about reading and writing the art as resistance and also consuming the art as resistance. How would each of you say is the best way for your readers to pick up that book and engage with it and share it with others?
Three things. One, I hope that folks will read it and they'll reach out to a teacher who made a difference in their lives, because teachers need to hear that thank you. I bet everybody in this room can think of that teacher who had a huge impact on them in elementary school or high school. Call them, find them, write them a note. The second thing is, I hope, whether it's my book or Karita's book, give a book to a young person who's thinking about their career to help them understand how important a career in education could be, the difference that they could make in someone's life. Because we need great people to go into teaching. It's important for the health of our society.